This is Trucker Hacks number 7. My name is Matthew Garnett. We are back and better than ever. We took a little hiatus this summer. I didn't really announce it to anybody, mainly because we don't have a lot of somebodies on the channel yet, but we'll get there eventually. Anyway, this week we're going to do a couple things. We're going to have, of course, the traditional Song of the Week. We've got some really interesting footage over the past couple of months. I just want to feature a couple of clips of it to you. Also, we're going to talk about what happens when you get a load of rod or rebar or something on an open deck when they don't have T-blocks, and what you're supposed to do about all that, because there's some dangers in that you may not be aware of, and we're going to cover that. We also are going to cover Dr. Thomas Sowell's 1980, I believe, interview on the firing line with William F. Buckley. Really interesting stuff, especially for the times we're in. Again, this is Matthew Garnett. Welcome to Trucker Hacks, and here we go with Song of the Week.
Do we want to get right?
So I chose Def Leppard's Let's Get Rocked for this week's Song of the Week for a couple reasons. First of all, if I ever need to wake up, song never fails. I mean, come on, let's face it, guys. I know we're supposed to pull over. We're supposed to get rest when we're fatigued. I get that sometimes. And let me just say for the record, that's what you should do. But sometimes I put on Def Leppard's Let's Get Rocked, and it wakes me up. So anyway, I just provided a pretty good background to show some of the cool footage that I've caught over the past month of tornado, of all things, crop dusters, my daughter shooting shotguns, my son, throwing the axe out back, my wife, working on her car while I'm out. These are great things that we want to capture. Good background to that. But also, I want to point out something humorous on this song, and all of Def Leppard songs, really, because everybody thinks their songs, they think this song is about having sex. It's not. It's about listening to rock music. Your mind's in the gutter. Your mind's in the gutter if you think this song is about sex. Now, you say, oh, well, Pour Some Sugar on Me is definitely about sex. No, it's not. It's about having tea. It's about having tea. And if you don't think so, your mind's in the gutter. Go back and listen to that song in the context of what it's like to have tea in Britain, and you'll see every bit of that is about having tea. And why not write a rock song to it? And why not write a rock song to listening to rock music? I think that's a pretty good thing to write a rock song too. So for those of you out there, again, who think that all these Def Leppard songs are just about getting in the sack and having sex with somebody, get your mind out of the gutter. That's it, and that's all. All right. there's Song of the Week. Now we'll get to Hack of the Week. Okay, so I'm not sure how many of you guys think about this one. Again, I'm willing to take comments, feedback, whatever else on this. However, I've got rebar on here. As you can see, they don't put T-blocks between this rebar, and some of these places require that this rebar be spaced the way it is, so they can offload it easier. Sorry if you don't have T-blocks on this. The rebar and that flat stock in the middle there, if you just throw a strap over that, nothing's holding that down. Absolutely nothing. Now, obviously, can it go side to side? Yeah, it can, insofar as, you know, it's going to hit the next set of rebar. But even then, you have to think about what your straps are doing when you put them over a load like this. What are they doing? They're squeezing that load together. It's not, I mean, yes, some of it's holding it down, but most of the pressure you put on a load, especially these low profile loads like this, what it's doing is it's squeezing that product together. That's all it's doing. It's not holding that stock in the middle. And so when you have a situation where they won't put T-blocks in something like this, and like, oh yeah, all the other guys do it. Well, I would not be one of those guys. Sorry, call me paranoid, whatever you want to call me. I'm just not doing it. I'm going to weave the straps through. So as you've noticed already, what I'm doing here is I'm strategically, I'm taking just two straps, and I'm weaving two straps through to hold the stock in the middle. So you see there, I went under the first one, over the second one, under the third one, over the fourth one, under the fifth one. And then I'm going to do the exact opposite on the front. I'm going to go over the first one, under the second one, over the third one, and so forth. And that's exactly how we're gonna hold this down. So as you can tell, this is a major pain in the butt. It's something I don't do very often, so I'm not real great at it. But there you go. Not that I'm that great at anything anyway, but that's what we're shooting for here. And so when you weave those straps like that, at least you've got something holding those middle pieces down. And that's the best way I can figure doing that. If anybody's got any better suggestions on that, please let me know. But as far as I can tell, this is the best way to do it. So we're going to weave this strap. Again, we're going to go over the first one, under the second one, over the third one, under the fourth one, over the fifth one, etc. It's a little bit hard to see with my head cam there, but that's exactly what's going on there. You can kind of see. Should be able to see what's happening there. I'm on top of that load, weaving them through. Got to be careful up there. Don't fall off your trailer, all that stuff. But this is what's got to be done. And as you can tell, I'm not the brightest bulb in the closet. So I think, oh, wait a second. No, that is no. Oh, no good. No good right there. Because guess what? My winch won't reach back that far, so either I've got to, so screw it. I got to redo it. Fantastic. Fan-freaking-tastic. Okay, so we're going to redo it so we get it right. I mean, that's the thing is, guys, you want to go down the road with peace of mind. You really do. To know that stuff's not going to be moving around on you. You're not going to end up with, a bundle of angle iron up in your cab. We don't want any of that. And that's why we're doing this. So I'm switching this one around so I can get it properly on a winch and get it secured properly. Now, honestly, the ones I'm worried about are those three inside bundles. So you notice I've got one long bundle of angle iron over there to the left-hand side of the trailer, or the driver's side of the trailer. Kind of got my hand on it right now. Then I've got 2 bundles of that flat stock. I think 2 bundles of it. Maybe I've got one. No, I can't tell. Yeah, I got one long bundle of that flat stock. All right, that one I am worried about. The 2 outs, and then I've got 2 bundles of rebar. Really, I've got, you know, the rest of them are short bundles of rebar. All right, and so what I'm trying to do is make sure that those ones on the inside are taken care of. That's the biggest thing. That's what you got to watch out for on loads like this where you don't have the T-blocks. And I'm sure, hopefully you guys know about it. If you don't, you're brand new to this sort of thing. I mean, this might be the first place you show up to. And if it is, I hope you watch this video, because if they just put this on it and you throw a couple straps over it, more than likely you'll get down the road. But if you have an accident, if you have to stop suddenly, etc., that stuff's not, that is unsecured. And if you get stopped by the police, they're definitely going to cite you for having unsecured material on your trailer. That's just plain and simple, because you can't just throw straps over this stuff and call it secured. They're not secured. Again, those straps squeeze stuff together. And what a T-block does is it sits, generally speaking, it sits on that piece of dunnage you see right there in the picture. It sits on that piece of dunnage between the bundles of steel, and it squeezes it together. So what happens is when you squeeze stuff together, then that prevents it from moving forward. That's just like on anything else you do, where you're using chains or whatever else that has multiple pieces per bundle, is you want to squeeze all that together, because what that's going to do is prevent it from moving forward. You're not so much worried about it moving upward. That part we've got covered. We can throw straps over stuff. We can throw chains over stuff all day long. But what we have to be worried about more than anything is stuff going forward. Because what's going to happen if, you know, some idiot cuts us off in traffic, we have to slam on our brakes, that stuff's going to want to go forward. So that's what you have to think about. Have I secured this load in such a way that this material is not going to go forward? All right. You know, and therefore, you know, probably kill you and everything, at least damage your truck severely. You're gonna, you know, you've seen those headache racks. I know you guys have, where guys haven't secured stuff. Particularly I-beams are the most notorious for this. They haven't secured stuff properly, and they end up with an I-beam going right in the back of those headache racks. Now, let me get back to this. And that's why they should have T-blocks on this stuff. They should. And that whole deal of, oh, well, guys go out of here all the time with it just like this, just throw a couple straps over them. Yeah, well, okay, I'm not the next guy. Just like I said before. Now, the biggest pain in the butt about this is getting those straps pulled as tightly as you can through that weave. Because what's going to happen is, even when we go over there and we start tightening down the other straps, it's not going to tighten down hard on those outside bundles. Okay, don't worry about that so much. Especially if you're doing a tarp job, definitely don't worry about it. If you've got you got an open load where it's exposing the straps where they could rattle and the popo could catch you on that might be a different story. There's solutions to that we can talk about another time. But what I'm trying to do is just pull that strap by hand as tightly as I possibly can, because once I put it in that winch, then it's not going to get much tighter on the other side. And that's okay, because the way those straps operate is what they're doing is they're cranking down on those middle pieces that I have that in. That's essentially what they're doing. And they might not be as tight on the outside pieces, especially where the hook is coming through the rub rail. They might not be as tight there as you normally would like a strap to be, but that's okay, because once we put our straps across the top, then we can start throwing straps across the top. Because kind of what we're doing is we're making all of these bundles of steel, right, that we have on this trailer, we're just making them one with the trailer. That's all we're shooting for. Okay, I do have 2 bundles of flat there. You see that? It's a crazy load. It's kind of a goofy load. But we're going to make it happen. So anyway, the point being, we're trying to make every piece of this steel one with the trailer. Then once we do that, we can throw all the straps we want to over the load. Everything's going to be fine after that. We don't have to worry about a thing. We're going to tarp this up, and we don't have to worry about it causing us problems going down the road. Hopefully this is making sense to you. And if you guys got questions about this, you know, shoot me some questions on this. Been looking, well, I've got a few questions from some of you so far, but yeah, you should care about what you're doing out here. You should care about what you're doing. So anyway, so we got the straps done. Now we got to tarp this. Why we're tarping rebar, I don't know. Maybe it's the, well, yeah. Why we're tarping angle iron, I don't know. Maybe it's the flat stock. All I know is Nucor, this division of Nucor requires you to tarp everything, so that's what we're going to do. And we get paid for it anyway, so who cares? So we got what I've done is I put the weave straps through there first, then I'm going to put my over straps, I don't know what you want to call them. The straps that are just going to simply go over the load over there next. And so to tarp, of course, we got to get this felt down. Woo, allergy season. Yeah, we've got to get these felts down so we're not going to tear our tarp up. So basically, we've done the weave straps below. Now we're just going to do the over the load straps, however you want to call it. We're going to put our felts down and then throw straps over them so those felts stay in place while when we throw the tarp over it. So we've got those in there tucked in nice and neat, trying to get them nice and neat. Then we're going to throw the straps over top of that, and then we'll be essentially ready to tarp this load. We can feel good about the securement on it. We don't have to worry about it ripping up our tarps. We don't have to worry about it coming through the headache rack, tearing up our headache rack, any of those other things. And that's what we're shooting for here. It's a pain in the butt. And like I say, I confuse myself half the time about, okay, I'm weaving them through here because it's just not something you do very often. And takes a long time, and you know, somebody might make fun of you. Whoa, what are you doing? Well, making sure this load's secure. That's what I'm doing. So, at any rate, that's the long and the short of it. Basically, all I'm going to do now, straighten these felts out, throw my straps over the top of this, and then the load's secured. Then all I got to do is tarp, and we're happy-go-lucky, ready to go. We don't have to worry about anything going wrong here. Right, so that's it. That's all there is to it. Gonna throw those straps over top, you know, according to the regulations, 8 to 10 feet apart. Basically, is what we're shooting for here. I try to get them. Try to place my. That's just one little tip there. I might give to you another hack for you. Try to place my dunnage where I want to throw straps, because it doesn't do very much good to put straps in the middle of steel, especially like rebar stuff that's buttery like that. It's just gonna bend down. It's gonna go. Like that, and what are you doing? Well, you're throwing it off the dunnage. That's all that's going on there. So you want to get your straps as close to the dunnage. I know you guys know this, but it's a good reminder. Don't get lazy about that. And really, I would say that's all there is to it, but this is a major pain in the butt. As you've seen, this video is taken, you know, well, and you're not even seeing the full thing. This took me a good, 20, 30, 40 minutes to get all this done. And it shouldn't take that long. I'm slow. I tend to be a little bit slow. I'd rather get things right than be fast. I like to get things right and be fast. And like, if you guys watch any of my previous videos, what I talk about is do stuff right. The speed will come. Do stuff right and the speed will come. That's always what we're shooting for here. But at any rate, that's really the deal. It's a pain in the butt, but that's the only way I can think to secure steel bundles like this. If you guys have better ideas, please let me know. But there is how I do this type of scenario where I've got bundles of steel, multiple units without T-blocks in it. Okay, there it is. Let's move on to our philosophy of the week. We're going to listen to Thomas Sowell be interviewed on the firing line. So here we go with that.
Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Like I told my last wife, I says, honey, I never drive faster than I can see. Besides that, it's all in the reflexes. You just listen to the old Pork Chop Express and take his advice on a dark and stormy night, all right? When some wild-eyed 8-foot-tall maniac grabs your neck, taps the back of your favorite head up against a barroom wall, and he looks you crooked in the eye and he asks you if you've paid your dues, well, you just stare that big sucker right back in the eye and you remember what old Jack Burton always says at a time like that. Have you paid your dues, Jack? Yes, sir, the check is in the mail. Well, you see, I'm not saying that I've been everywhere and I've done everything, but I do know it's a pretty amazing planet we live on here. And a man would have to be some kind of fool to think we're all alone in this universe.
It is always exciting when Thomas Sowell produces a new book, which means we live in exciting times, since he tends to do this quite often, 3 times in 1981, for instance. The Economics and Politics of Race, subtitled An International Perspective, asks most of the questions we are all asking ourselves about race and progress and politics. What sets Professor Sowell apart from many of his colleagues is that he sets down exactly what his researches indicate without any attempt to conform to fashionable political notions. Thomas Sowell was born in North Carolina, and as...
All right, so right there, let me just stop it. Buckley says some... It's a little bit hard to follow Buckley. Let me just put that. You got to really pay attention, because what he just said there about Thomas Sowell is very important. That he follows the research irrespective of what the popular line is on whatever particular topic. It's very important. It's very rare. It's not the most enjoyable things a lot of times, especially I've seen some of his Sowell stuff that have debunked my preconceived notion. I've seen very well done research that have ruined my narrative about things, and that's kind of what the only way I really see forward in this whole issue with race relations is that we've got to follow the data instead of our preconceived notions, narratives, emotions, everything else. And Buckley is pointing out that here right away.
The boy moved to New York. From high school in Harlem, he went to Harvard, where he took his first degree in economics. His second he took in Columbia, and his PhD at the University of Chicago. He went on to teach at UCLA, at Amherst, at Cornell, and since 1980 has resided as a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, where during this period he has worked assiduously. His last 3 books were called Markets and Minorities, Ethnic America, and Pink and Brown People. Our examiner today is Professor Robert Cashman of Lehman College, about whom more in due course. I'd like to begin by asking Professor Sowell if he would tell us about shifting IQs and the relevance of this discovery.
Well, the controversy, of course, is over whether IQs are inherited or a result of the environment. And over time, IQs do shift. That is, as of the time of World War I, for example, the Jewish IQs were below the national average. And in fact, Carl Brigham, who was the author of the College Board SAT, said that this disproved the popular notion that the Jews were highly intelligent. As it turned out, he was somewhat premature, and a decade later, the Jews had higher than average IQs. In Japan, the average IQ has risen 7 points in the past generation. There's also data on black orphans raised by white families. Their average IQ is 106. So that the IQs are not set in concrete by any means.
Compared to what?
The national average of 100.
I see. Uh-huh.
And compared to an average IQ of 85 for black children as a whole. So they're not set in concrete, but neither are they irrelevant, because they measure skills that are very important in terms of mathematics, science, and many other intellectual areas. So they're not irrelevant, but neither are they set in concrete.
Let me read a sentence from your book, which I think grabs, at least grabbed this reader instantly. When you wrote, "The real question is what confluence of circumstances produced the fortunate conditions that a relatively small part of the human species enjoys today. To what extent can these peculiar combinations of historical circumstances be analyzed, recreated, or grafted onto other societies?" Now, you tell us that Jews came here and their IQ was at this level, and just a little bit later it rose to this level. This was the impact of America, right, on
Yes.
something you call human capital.
Yeah.
Describe that, would you?
Well, the human capital is simply the whole range of skills, traits, discipline, even physical health that enable people to produce more than other people.
Inherited or learned, or both?
I guess it would have to be mostly learned, but I think, but almost inherited, in the sense that every generation raises the next generation. And so it's virtually the same as if it were inherited for most people. Very few people are in situations such as black orphans raised in white families. That happens very rarely.
Well, Professor Vandenhag quotes a study of zygotic twins in which one twin was raised in poor, austere circumstances, another in affluent circumstances, one made to go to school, one not made to go to school, but they ended up, roughly speaking, with the same IQ. This would not be the same as your research has indicated, would it?
Yeah, I don't know which study he's talking about, but I've looked at some of those twin studies, and unfortunately, some of those studies don't refer to twins that were raised in very different circumstances. And in fact, in some cases, they were raised in the same town by different relatives. There's a whole controversial literature on those twins, so I would have to know which studies he was talking about.
Well, to get back to the business of the accumulation of human capital is largely passive?
No. I think it's not necessarily a matter of individual merit, in the sense that if you're born into a culture and into a family where there are certain values, and particularly if there are families that really insist upon those values, where it's not a matter of doing your own thing, then you will grow up with those values, and you will have whatever the benefits happen to come along with those values.
You once told me that.
Okay, so here Sowell and Buckley are talking about something where you're still discussing in this day and time, which is race and IQ. Is it something that's inherited, unalterable, etc., etc.? And what Sowell is pointing out is what's been measured with other groups like the Jews is that they have been able to raise their IQs in a single generation based on how the family is structured and their culture. And so that's been Sowell's mantra, his thesis really for his entire work is that really what needs to change when it comes to these disparities in race, these disparities in outcomes in race, is not so much the structural context, but the cultural context. And I mean, there's no doubt that you can oppress a people to the point with a structure where they have no chance of establishing a culture that would yield good results. But at the end of the day, what really is the most important factor is indeed the culture. It's not the structure. And that's the big debate going on in race relations today. If you wonder what this is all about, really, that's the big debate. Is it are racial minorities trapped in a structure that is going to keep them perpetually oppressed and downtrodden? Some would argue yes. Sowell would say absolutely not. That's not the problem. The problem is not the structure. The problem is the culture. The culture within the black community needs to change, and some would call that victim blaming, but others like Glenn Lowry would say no. That's not victim blaming. Others like Jason Riley, who wrote the book that I am particularly fond of on this matter, Please Stop Helping Us. In other words, every time, quote unquote, white people or the government or somebody else tries to intervene in this problem, they make it worse. And I love that sentiment that Riley puts across. Please stop helping us. What we don't need structural change. What we need is cultural change, and that's exactly where the debate lies. And there might be some middle ground on that where we could talk about, okay, there's this structure, that structure, the other structure. But at the same time, Sowell, in all of his writings, if you're not familiar with Thomas Sowell's writings and you're interested in this topic, which you should be as an American right now because it's what's tearing the country apart, get familiar with Sowell on this. Because throughout his writings, yes, he talks about situations, even in, say, South Africa, where the structures were clearly biased against race, against black people, and yet the culture overcame it. And so whatever the situation might be, Sowell would contend that given the proper culture, given the proper upbringing, given the proper values passed on from generation to generation, these are the things that are going to solve these problems. And while the structural piece might be helpful in some way, shape, manner, or form, and we shouldn't stand for stuff like redlining. We shouldn't stand for stuff like Jim Crow. We certainly shouldn't stand for something like slavery or any kind of racial supremacy in any shape, manner, or form. Why we should combat those things, really where the battle lies is in this cultural scenario, and that's exactly what Sowell is pointing out here.
You once told me that in your early days at Harvard, you had a very dramatic personal travail. You were either going to make it or not going to make it.
Yes.
And you shut yourself up and made yourself make it.
Yes.
In the absence of which, you would have been very different today from an esteemed
absolutely.
scholar. Now, what was it that gave you that strength? Was it something that you generated? Was it self-generating? Or was it something that a resource that you inherited, or something that came in through the capillaries of the people who surrounded you at Harvard?
Oh, I suspected by the time I got there, I was fairly well formed. I was 25 years old as a sophomore transfer student. It's hard to know. There were all those factors there if I were to look back, and I'm not sure that I'd be the person with the objectivity to say. Certainly, having been through adversity before was some help, because I can remember a number of times in life when I faced tough things, and I said, "For God's sakes, I spent two months at Paris Island."
What else is tough?
Yes, so you can't overcome that. I can remember once when I was dying to be a baseball player, and I injured my right shoulder, and I became left-handed for 2 years. So those things you draw upon later on. I think many people, in trying to insulate young people from adversity, insulate them from the things that give them strength.
Okay, well now let's move on to the political implications of some of these points. One of them is a continuing war by you against the notion that affirmative action helps people, right?
Yes, but it's more than that. It's really a re-examination of the whole set of underlying assumptions, not only behind this program, but about social thinking in general. One of the things I wanted to deal with in this book, and the reason it's an international perspective, is whether or not a group is in fact formed by the society around it, or whether in fact the group has its own pattern, which follows it wherever it goes. Many people who criticized some of my earlier writings said that I arbitrarily attributed to groups characteristics that were really a function of the world they lived in the United States. And so I then looked at groups in other countries, the Germans in Brazil and Australia and Russia, the Chinese and Indonesia in the United States, other countries, to see, do they in fact have their own pattern, or are they simply reflecting what's happened to them in that particular country? And what I found by and large was that they had their own pattern, that the Germans in Australia specialize in very much the same kind of occupations and industries with the same kinds of skills, with the same kinds of, quote, stereotypes, unquote, about them as to their frugality, their hard working, their thoroughness, their honesty, law abiding, etc., that you find in the United States.
Well, but doesn't that contend a little bit with your notion that the culture is something you go piggyback on, for instance, when the Jews rose in their general level of IQ? Or is it a combination of bringing your own folkways, mores with you, but also getting on that which is dynamic in the culture you visit?
It's obviously both, as most things are in social causation. But many people came in when the Jews came in, and faced, for example, with the free public libraries, the free colleges of New York City, and so on. Many of these other groups never went near those things, or very seldom. Whereas the Jews, having a history in which learning had a certain place that it did not have in other cultures, it was like a gold mine to them. The minute they saw all of this, they seized upon it. At one time, not only were the Jews a majority at CCNY, they were 20% of the students at Fordham University, which is Catholic.
So that what you're saying is that there was something that catapulted them towards taking advantage of something that our culture provided.
Oh, absolutely.
Therefore, that permitted the ascendancy of their IQ.
Oh, yes.
Which would not have been the case if they had found themselves, say, in Brazil.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in Israel, I understand that the Sephardic Jews, who have been in the Arab countries for centuries, have lower IQs than the Ashkenazic Jews who have been in Europe and the United States for centuries. So clearly the society has its impact. But it's also true that there are people facing exactly the same situation. For example, youngsters sitting side by side in the same classroom from different groups, living in the same neighborhood, and yet the IQ differences that you'll see will be as large as those among blacks and whites going to school on the opposite sides of town in Mississippi in the Jim Crow era.
Okay, so there's an important distinction to be made here, obviously. We're talking about culture, largely. And so here's where, in a sense, we've got to give the devil his due, I guess, to put it crassly, that we do have to look at situations in the United States where perhaps there are certain cultural or systemic, shall we say, or institutional barriers to groups rising up. And we want to identify those. We identified, again, redlining, Jim Crow, slavery being one of the biggest ones, to say that these are things that are going to, no matter what kind of culture an individual group might have, these things are going to be so oppressive that no matter how excellent or well crafted their culture might be to raise the next generation, that these things are just going to be simply are going to be things that are just can't be overcome and need to be changed in lieu of policy. Again, Jim Crow being a perfect example of that, voting rights, etc. And what Sowell is pointing out is that yes, there are situations in culture and where policy is made that tends to hold that will hold a certain group down, no matter what their culture is. However, given the opportunities, and I think what Sowell would say is that America is the land of opportunity. He was pointing out how Jews and their culture took advantage of opportunities of free college, libraries, etc., whereas other groups didn't, and subsequently were able to raise their cumulative IQ over a very short period of time, over one generation. What was the difference there? What was the difference? And the difference was the culture inside of that particular community to overcome certain obstacles and to take advantage of the opportunities that the culture provided. And so, but at the same time, I think what Sowell is saying is that no matter, and this is what he said, like I said before, numerous times in his previous writings and talks, is that even in a situation like South Africa, if a certain culture is inculcated among a certain group, namely blacks, that a lot of adversity can be overcome, and in fact, that adversity will spur on growth within that community. So yes, of course, we shouldn't have Jim Crow laws. We shouldn't be purposefully discriminating against another group just because of the color of their skin, their melanin count. That shouldn't be a matter of policy. But at the same time, what really makes the difference in all of this, at the end of the day, is the kind of culture that group inculcates within their families and within and with the generations going forward. So Sowell is saying both. Yeah, we want to give as much free opportunities as we possibly can, but there are certain groups who have inculcated certain cultures within their communities, within their families, that will propel that group forward more rapidly than other types of cultural settings. And really, at the end of the day, just to put it very simply, what Sowell is getting after here, and what many of the modern day, I would say, more alternate, I don't know, maybe that's a bad word given the circumstances, the alternate views on what the black community needs is a solid family structure. More black boys born into families with a father, with a mother and father, not just a mother. And so that, I think that's what Sowell is ultimately driving at, and that in fact is the thing that overcomes these difficulties more than anything else. And given the opportunities, if that culture is in place, then those folks tend to excel in very dramatic ways. All right.
Ms. Sowell, the scare word in any discussion of race is, of course, the word genetic.
Yes.
Because too often people are delighted to affirm genetic differences, which allow for superior and inferior races and so on and so forth. Now, how, in fact, is one to distinguish between that which is genetic and that which is so impacted culturally that it might almost have that effect? You speak about the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardic Jews, and continuing differentials notwithstanding that the melting pot in Israel is now 40 years old. How do you account for that? And do you run the danger of the word genetic being used metaphorically to mean also hard cultural insisted inclinations?
I guess that my emphasis would, of course, be on the cultural. The Sephardic Jews, for example, who came to the United States and did not have these centuries in the Arab countries, are not at any disadvantage vis-a-vis Ashkenazic Jews in the United States. I think that's probably true in places like Brazil or Curacao as well. So it would be cultural primarily, at least in my judgment. Now, there are those who would attribute it to genetics. I had an argument with someone like that last week. The great problem is these things go so much together, that taking the black population of the Western Hemisphere, those blacks who have a higher percentage of white ancestry have had enormous social advantages historically. In the United States, when there was slavery, the overwhelming bulk of the slaves were black, but 37% of the free blacks were in fact mulattoes, which is in the American definition, half white or more. In Latin America, there are countries in which more than half of all the free blacks were in fact mulattoes, and in which the great majority of the slaves were black.
And advantages inured to them? Advantages inured to
Oh,
them?
absolutely, enormously. Well, freedom alone would be one big advantage. But even under slavery itself, there were distinctions made between the mulattoes and the blacks. The mulattoes being very often the offspring either of the slave owner or of the overseer, and therefore getting preferential treatment. And so throughout the Western Hemisphere, those people who have higher white ancestry among the black population have been economically, educationally, and otherwise more advanced. And in times past, it was quite common for them to attribute their success to genetics, when in fact they were fairly blatant historical differences. But
Okay, don't miss what Sowell's saying here. He's not saying it's a genetic thing. He's saying it's a cultural thing. Notice that he talked about how the mulattoes, even during slave times, were given preferential treatment by the masters. Right? Again, I mean, just on its face, the raw thing, it's ugly. It's all ugly stuff. You've got slave masters engaging in sexual relations with their slaves in order to have these mulatto offspring, and then they're given preferential treatment by the masters. Right? Ugly. What Sowell is pointing out is that because they were given the preferential treatment, they did the outcomes that they had were better. It wasn't because of their genetics. It was because of the way they were raised. That's what Sowell's pointing out here. As ugly as it was, that was certainly the case. And Sowell is brilliant, remarkable at giving these extreme examples of certain groups overcoming certain outcomes that were normative to their community by dent of how they were raised. See, that's the idea. It's a cultural thing. It's not a genetic thing. It's a genetic thing in the sense that the culture gets passed on down to the next generation, and as long as that toxic culture is perpetuated, that's where the danger lies. And what Sowell's pointing out is, at base, the black community needs a cultural change. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. And again, you might call that victim blaming, but again, along with Riley and Lowry, McWhorter, and the rest of them, I would say no. The black community does not need our weak white help vis-a-vis policy changes. That's impotent. That's weak. That's to say that the black community doesn't have the strength or the wherewithal to overcome adversity, and they certainly do. They certainly do. They have that power with them, and then just like Sowell was talking about when he was at Harvard, when he wanted to play baseball and he hurt his shoulder and he started throwing left-handed. People are strong enough to overcome these things, and particularly, I am absolutely convinced that those in the black community are strong enough and capable enough to overcome whatever they're facing without our help. Now, can we lend a helping hand? Can we provide opportunity? Of course, I'm about that. I want to see that happen in very, very real ways. But at the end of the day, it's on them, and they're strong enough to do it. You know, we talk about how, you know, I really despise this whole idea of, oh, we can't expect black people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. You know, we to me, that invokes that old cliche of the soft bigotry of low expectations. Yes, they can. They can bootstrap themselves. They absolutely can, no matter what they're facing. I mean, look at what the black community has overcome through the centuries in the United States. They've overcome all this stuff, and you're telling me they can't overcome whatever it is that's going on today? Yes, they can. They absolutely can. They're strong enough. They're smart enough. They can figure it out. And to call and for other black leaders like Sowell to call them to account and say, hey, you guys can figure this out. Get it figured out. Because, and again, this is one thing I love about Glenn Lowry that he points out all the time is, so these white people that have been oppressing you this whole time, that's your goal, is to change their mind such to the degree that they're going to start helping you out in a way that you can overcome these things? How can you possibly think that's what's going to happen? You're going to have to start grabbing a hold of your bootstraps, and you're strong enough to do it. You're capable enough to do it. We just got to get it done. It's a tall order, to be sure, because there's a number of factors that go into that when people are telling you you're a victim and that you know no matter what you do you can't possibly overcome blah 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 blah. No. The narrative has to change, and way back in 1981 when Thomas Sowell was on here with Buckley, he had this peg, and I am convinced that continues to be the situation. I'm absolutely convinced that that those who face difficult circumstances in the United States, particularly in minority communities, have the strength, the ability, the intelligence to bootstrap this thing. They're going to have to, because I mean, let's face it. At the end of the day, one of their theses is that us whites suck at this. We're terrible at it. Again, I like Jason Riley. Please stop helping us. You guys are awful. Get away. Let us take care of this. And I'm absolutely convinced that's the path forward.
The question is, how would you then separate out the two things, since they always occur together?
So that when Huey Newton went to Cuba and ended up complaining that all the privates were black and all the non-coms were mulattoes and all the generals were white, he was really making your point.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm amazed with all the way that the American performance in the Caribbean has been put under a microscope, that no one has noticed that those Cuban soldiers being brought back are black,
Yeah, right.
and those Cubans who are running the country are white, and the Cubans who are appearing on television defending their country are likewise white.
Well, now, I think people read your book incorrectly who come to the following conclusion, but let me, in any event, state the conclusions they come to. Namely, that you oppose efforts, political efforts, to give equal opportunity, which in fact you do not, correct?
Yes.
What you oppose, as I understand it, and as your book very plainly states, is any preferential treatment that disguises objective standards. Is that correct?
Yes, and particularly since the net effect of the preferential treatment, which is preferential in intention more so than in results, is that those blacks who are particularly disadvantaged have fallen further behind under these policies, that such policies have typically benefited those blacks who were well off, who became better off. And this is true also in other countries. In India, there's a program in Bombay, and someone who wrote about this commented that this program is for the benefit of the clerks, not the coolies. But that's been true in general, and that's what's true in the United States. That it's not the coolies that benefit, it's the clerks that benefit, who then aspire to higher occupations. For example, blacks who have relatively less work experience, lower levels of education, black female-headed families, all these groups have fallen further behind during a decade or more of affirmative action. Black female-headed families have had an absolute decline in real income over this span and have fallen further behind white female-headed families. At the same time, black couples who are both college educated earn higher incomes than white couples who are both college educated. So that this whole program makes it, provides incentives to hire blacks who are safe. Therefore, one will make some effort towards one's quota, but one will not take in people who might not progress enough for their promotions and discharge patterns to satisfy the government. So you make it risky to hire average blacks and more desirable to hire blacks who have not privileges, but advantages.
Well, now, do you ascribe to the programs of the past 10 years that polarization? Because if so, how does that account for the apparent correlation between those families, those black families that do not do well, and the vastly increased number of one-parent black families?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, during the past 10 years, we've had affirmative action. Mm-hmm. We have also had we've also had a rise of between 21 to 37% of families, black families, that have a single parent.
Yes.
I.e., there's been a desertion by the male, by the father.
Yes.
Now, is that a part of the welfare program, or is that entirely coincidental? And to what extent is that the socially causative factor of the phenomenon you're describing?
Well, if I limit my description just to families that are female-headed, and I compare blacks and whites, then within that comparison, I see that the blacks are falling further and further behind. Yet if I pick almost any measure of more advantaged families, I find the blacks not only catching up, but in some cases overtaking and passing the whites. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of ways you can look at it and you get the same result. And what that suggests to me is that those blacks who have the skills, the experience, the education, and so on, are finding things much, much easier than ever before, whereas those where there's a risk involved in hiring them, the people aren't going to take that risk. I've seen her explain to me very explicitly in the case of women, and I suspect that they wanted me to draw the same conclusion with respect to blacks. Universities have said, people at universities have said to me, we will not hire a woman who, for assistant professor unless we're sure she's going to make an associate professor, because the cost of legal processes in case she doesn't is so high. I remember telling this to a woman who was a full professor to see what response I would get.
A black woman?
Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
And her response was, yes, that's the way I hire, because I also have no time to waste at the EOC and in the courtroom.
So therefore, they don't get the same running chance. The
That's
white
right.
students, the white.
If you're going to hire someone
scholars do.
mediocre, the employers are safer hiring mediocre whites who can be thrown out if they don't work out without any repercussions.
All right, so Sowell is talking about trade-offs here. Again, he's re-emphasizing the point he's been making the entire time that Jason Riley makes quite poignantly in the title of his book, Please Stop Helping Us, that these programs have, in fact, not been helpful at all. And what's needed is, yes, a level playing field, for sure. But what's needed more is cultural changes within these minority communities that will propel them forward. And really, that's the theme of this whole thing. And then again, the whole idea of, well, we've used affirmative action, welfare programs, and et cetera, to try to help level the playing field. In other words, the playing field has been like this, right? Let's see if I can get this in the camera. Like, yeah, I can't really do it. The playing field has been unlevel. And like LBJ said, LBJ said, how can we expect people that have started 100 yards back, from the starting line be expected to? So we want to bring them up to the starting line. And what Sowell is saying is that you can't. You can't do that. What you've got to do is level the playing field and then allow those communities to bootstrap themselves up to the levels. And that's just how it is. That's what the data bears out. And the more you try to bring that group up to that starting line, because they've been so oppressed in times past, the more you're actually harming them, the more you're actually setting them back to coming up to the starting line. That's what Sowell's pointing out here. So, that's my opening salvo here. We're going to be covering this topic for a while because it's the topic in our country today, and something I care very, very deeply about, and want to see this issue resolved. And I am convinced the best way it can be resolved is within the context of the American experiment and Western civilization. Right? So we're going to cut it off there for now. I would encourage you to go. There's a couple of interviews with Thomas Sowell, with William Buckley on the YouTube. This is one I would watch and check out. Consider for yourself maybe some of these other figures I've mentioned. But for now, this wraps up our Matthew Garnett School of Truck Driving and Philosophy and our Trucker Hacks. Number 7. We'll see you next time with our next installment.